Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Simply Bitcoin IRL. Today we have a very special guest. We have Maya Parbhoe. I hope I pronounced that correctly. But before we get her on stage, I do want to give a very special shout out to Simply Bitcoin's lead sponsor. It makes the show possible. Of course, I'm talking about best place to build your automatic self-custody Bitcoin stack. I'm talking about bitcoinwell.com. It's automatic self-custody. What does that mean? That means every time you buy Bitcoin on Bitcoin Well, as soon as the funds clear, it goes straight to your self-custody Bitcoin wallet address, which perfectly aligns to the Simply Bitcoin ethos of the separation of money and state, because after all, self-custody is the revolution. To get started, head over to bitcoinwell.com today and use promo code SimplyBTC to get 3 tosses into the Bitcoin wishing well, which essentially gives you an opportunity to win up to 1 million sats every time you toss a coin into the wishing well. Anyways, everybody, I do want to bring Maya up on stage. Maya, 1 through 10, how did I pronounce your last name?
A 9.5.
Nine and a half. Oh, that's pretty good. It's pretty good. So I was like, oh my God, she's gonna give me a 4. Anyways, Maya, I am so excited for you to join us on the show. You're running for office in Surinam. Surinam is it's an interesting country. It's in South America. It's actually very close to where I'm originally from. I'm originally from Venezuela. So I think a lot of people they're not familiar with that part of the world, and it's just interesting to speak to someone from that side of the world.
Yeah, not many people have visited. Not many people that I actually meet actually even know where it is. So, yeah, you're actually pretty close with Venezuela. Venezuela, Guyana, Suriname, and then French Guyana, and then again Brazil. So, yeah, northern coast of South America, just like Venezuela.
Absolutely, and it sounds like you got the accent down packed for Venezuela too.
It's
Anyways, go
it's
ahead.
Disney, the accent.
I mean, but you say it as if you're Venezuelan. You say the country with the
Oh, we
accent.
oh, I
Yeah, you
have
say
you.
you say you say Venezuela and everything. It's interesting. It's
Yeah,
interesting to me.
we have a Venezuelan community here as well.
Okay, there's a big Venezuelan community in Suriname.
Yeah, and
Interesting.
growing. Yeah.
So you're also the founder of, and hopefully I pronounce this correctly too. The name of it's Daedalus Labs. Is that correct?
Daedalus Labs. For that one, you
Date.
get a
That's pretty hard. Like I hope I get a pass on that one.
yeah, Daedalus Labs. It's a Greek mythology. He was an architect and the developer of the wings made of wax for Icarus.
And then like that's the story where Icarus got close to the sun. His like the
Yeah.
wings melted. What? So tell us a little bit, because I'm really interested to hear about you running for office in Suriname, because I truly believe like we just need more people that are Bitcoin friendly and supportive of Bitcoin in office, and I think that's going to create environments where it's a creates positive regulatory environments, and I think we need that more around the world. But I want to focus on that specifically because that name is really interesting to me. You obviously put a lot of thought behind it. There's Greek mythology attached to it. So first of all, what does Daedalus Labs do, and what inspired you to found it?
Well, actually, so I started out with an import company when I was 15, and that's named QuickShip. And then about a decade ago, or a little over a decade ago, I started my second company, Icarus Geosystems. Started that with my co-founder, who's a civil engineer, and we focused on innovating in infrastructure here and bringing technology that is already pretty normal in other countries such as the U.S. or Europe, bringing that to Suriname. And we developed Icarus over a couple of years. We've done ports, so infrastructure, roads, dams, dikes, primarily for oil and gas and also for public works here and project developers. So hence Icarus. That was the second company name. And basically, This is so very funny. So out of that company, we could invest into something else. We hit about, I think, 5.8 million in the peak, right before COVID, and out of their revenue, we had some profit that we could reinvest, and then we wanted to reinvest into something that I was passionate about, because civil engineering is not really, I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing that. It's not something I'm truly passionate about. And in the meantime, I was already obsessed with Bitcoin, and I'd already been obsessed with stocks and tech companies just since I was a kid. And then basically the intersection between financial markets and Bitcoin, and how, that new system that Bitcoin enabled, that is not as centralized as, the central banking system. How would that work? What would that look like? Our country doesn't have a capital market. It's like an Excel sheet on a laptop that goes around once a month, and it's just like 11 companies that are owned by the same people. There's barely any trading. They had like 6K in volume in the past year, so it's completely non-developed, and that's like a cornerstone of the economy that's basically missing for people to be able to invest, into people that they believe in, or people that can actually generate a return, because not everybody has that, entrepreneurial bone in their body, or can um, generate a return or create a company. And that also makes it harder for companies to grow and scale. And I was looking at, other countries, and for the US capital market, for example, how a company that, like us, for example, you have 5.8 million in revenue. How much capital can you raise, and how can it help you to grow? For us, it was extremely hard here. Banks charge between 18 to 24% interest rates on commercial loans, so that makes you immediately not competitive, um, and makes it harder to run a business in this environment. So looking at all the problems that we face here, we don't have financial infrastructure, we don't have payment infrastructures, there's no payment processors, the banks didn't have online banking or wallets back then. um, like, how would all of that develop here? And that's when I started to work on developing the capital market here, and out of that actually came AutoX. And AutoX is basically just gold, with an X for exchange, and Bitcoin being digital gold. It made sense, our country basically being one of the major gold destinations in the Caribbean, or on the continent, kind of like El Dorado. So it kind of made sense to name the exchange that. And that's how it evolved. And I think I did fly too close to the sun with AutoX, to be honest. We started working with the governor here. Everything was ready. The exchange was ready to launch. We were ready to issue the first 190 million bond issuance. And then our central bank governor got locked up in a political trial.
Oh
So
wow.
due to political instability, we got delayed, and like the cost to just keep the exchange, and it was self funded. So the cost to keep the exchange up and running for a longer duration of time just wasn't viable. So we wanted to wait until we actually could launch it, or could start up that market again before we launched that. And then we shifted focus to another product that we had on the roadmap, which is a Bitcoin real estate investment trust. And that's how Daedalus basically came to be. And Daedalus, as you know, is Icarus's father, and he's the one that cautioned him not to fly too close to the sun, or
I
too
love
close to
that.
yes. The story actually, now in hindsight, it actually is playing out kind of like the historical, like the mythology, basically him being an inventor, an architect, imagining things that were never possible, or wouldn't be imaginable in those times, like a human flying, and now we actually do. So that's the same thing we want to do with Icarus. We want to create a world where you don't need a mortgage, right? Because we're all Bitcoiners, but most of us can't afford to buy our house outright. A lot of us are still tied to our mortgage. So how do you use existing financial infrastructure, existing regulation, to kind of build a model like Blackstone, for example, but not to benefit just the top 1%, but to benefit everyone, right? And
Of
how do
course.
you structure that? So that's basically how we got started with that.
Well, that is it's a fascinating story and just fascinating. Like the story itself is a myth. Like it has a mythology to it. I love the name that you chose and how it was Icarus's father and how that it was appropriate based on what you went through as an experience. Now, what's really interesting to me, Maya, is usually what tends to happen in Latin America, right? Is you succeed in your country. I'm talking from a Venezuelan's perspective, right? You succeed in Venezuela, and then the mecca of where you want to end up is Miami, right? Like that's essentially what happens. And I know you know what I'm talking about. And you see this all the time, whether it's Brazil or Colombia, whatever. You kind of want to end up in Miami. Like that's where you want to end up. Now, what I always applaud and what I find interesting is you didn't decide you found success. Like I think you said it was $5.8 million in revenue on a yearly basis. Is that correct?
Well,
So
on
that
an peak.
but still, it's quite impressive. But you decided to stay in Suriname. So where of course, like there's less economic opportunity. Like that's just the reality. Like in Venezuela, there's especially with the current political situation, like there's less economic opportunities for entrepreneurs or people that want to build businesses. Not only from the political standpoint, but also from the kind of economic standpoint. I'm curious as to why you decided to stand and fight. And I don't mean fight like actually fight, but like metaphorically, because you're choosing to build you're choosing to build out in your country, right? Which I find very, I find noble, but at the same time, like, what you would see from most people is, okay, I've made my money. Now it's time to move on to, it's time for me to move essentially. So I'm very curious, like, why did you feel so passionately about staying in Suriname and building in Suriname, despite even you having potential, you've had regulatory hurdles in the past, right?
Yeah.
So what would be your response to that?
Well, actually, I think that is the majority of the population. Everybody kind of sees Miami as the U.S. as the place where you go to make your dreams happen. Um, but I've even I was very fortunate to go to Oxford, and I did an educational course there on fintech and blockchain, and wanted just to get the right credentials, and if needed more knowledge for the exchange, and then was selected to their fintech lab as one of the few in 2018. So I've actually received a request to move to London back then, and start all of this out of London. But I was very adamant about developing it here, just because I feel like this is where the opportunity is because there is a lack of infrastructure. So you're basically building everything from scratch. You don't have those legacy incumbents. You don't have all of the infrastructure and all of the players and intermediaries that you already have in those established legacy markets. And afterward, I was also sent to MIT, to Boston, to apply there, and work from there. But I, I I still tend to, every time, also in Switzerland, the same thing. I spent a year and a half there, and it's just, I keep coming back. Like, even if I'm away for 6 weeks, or once it starts to head towards that 2 month, 3 month um, timeline, then I start getting just very, very homesick, and I just miss my family. I just miss my home. I miss the freedom that we have here. Because even in Europe, it's very constricted. I do feel like there is a rule or a regulation or a law for everything, which does make life is very structured there. But I feel like you don't work to live. you live to work, and whereas here you can kind of just live. And I think, just to give you an idea, something that is very uncommon, or that something that surprised most of the people that have come here from Europe or other countries and visited my home, they just say that this is unknown. Like, people coming in and out, my friends coming in and out, or family coming in and out, people just stopping by for lunch, us sitting all here on the patio at night. It's very it's a very entrenched community where you're just kind of social all the time, and you go to the interior on the weekend, you drive somewhere, you go and relax in a river, or we go boating with our friends, or you go somewhere in the jungle and sit in a waterfall, and it's just a different type of life. And I think that's so valuable here. Even comparing it to Bali, for example, Bali had so much tourists. Like, it was overcrowded. Everything was also, like, it was made for tourism. Whereas here, everything seems very much untouched. And even we have rural villages where they still have traditions that are hundreds of years old, and they still live, life like they did a couple of hundred years ago. So it's a different type of life that you just can't let go. And this country has so much natural resources, so much potential. The people are so nice. Like, people are so genuinely nice, and just like they'll invite you into their home for dinner, just being a visitor. So people here are just, I don't know. They deserve it. I feel like this country deserves it. The country deserves to be, developed, for them to have the same economic opportunities, or at least, a normal standard of living, like with proper health care, with good education, with economic opportunity. And it's also such a small population, 600,000 people. And we're very similar to Singapore, logistically, economic, like, I'm sorry, cultural melting pot of, diversity of people, without the amount of racism that you have there. So I just, I have to. I can. I can't go to. I can't do this in Switzerland. I can't do this anywhere else in the world. It needs to be done here.
It needs to be at home. And no, it just kind of reminds me of it sounds like very like the culture. It sounds very Hispanic, like very family orientated, very social. And when you're talking about like going to the waterfall, it reminds me of there's this national park in Venezuela we used to go with my family called Canaima, where like Salto Angeles, where like the largest waterfall in the world, and they have the like those very like those plateaus that go like into the sky. If you ever watched that movie with what was it called, the one with the balloon and the old guy, like that's they a lot of the inspiration from that movie came from that national park in Venezuela. And I just, when you talk about the waterfall, when you talk about the outdoors, I know I in that specific part of the world, I know what you're referring to, and it is absolutely beautiful. It's extremely unique, and it is quite special. Like at least in my case, you see that like literally the monkeys going around, like the beautiful the parrots and all that stuff, and it's incredibly unique and it's incredibly special. So yeah, there's no place like home, and it's very it's very admirable that you decided that you need to essentially plant the flag, stay there, and help build out this infrastructure. And that's kind of where I want to lead the conversation is like, what is the current infrastructure like state right now in Suriname? Like, what needs to be done? What is the internet connectivity? What's the infrastructure like? What how much work needs to be done, and what can you do as a single entrepreneur building a company there to move the country forward in a better direction?
Yeah, so we have about 80% mobile penetration,
80. You
and
said 80.
80, yeah. So it's
Is
very,
it? Can I ask you something? Is it very similar to what happened in Africa, where they skipped the landlines completely and they built out the mobile towers?
no, no, no. We actually have landlines everywhere, but they rapidly expanded mobile towers, and it's we're I think the country in the world with the least population density. Um, Like it's 600,000 people in a very small city. We don't have skyscrapers. It's everybody has their own yard. We don't have apartment buildings, like the big apartment buildings like you have in other countries. We basically just have everybody has their own plot of land. Everybody has their home on it, and it's a very small footprint. If you look on it, you look at it on Google Maps, you'll see like there's this tiny little piece of the country that's only developed or built on. We're 93% forested, so 93% is Amazon rainforest. So it makes it pretty easy to get cell phone coverage in just those areas. And then the government had a program to put cell phone towers in other rural villages in the country. So we have broad cell phone coverage, and that makes it easier for people to connect on the internet. So in terms of internet connectivity, we're actually pretty doing pretty well. It's unfortunate they chased off Starlink. Otherwise, it would be easier for some remote areas to still have access to high speed internet. But on average, it's fairly stable here. It's just for some reason my house sometimes it gets a bit glitchy here and there, or it gets a little bit unstable. But um, I'd say maybe once it starts really raining, then you might get some connectivity issues.
So and let me ask you about this. So what's the like central bank situation there? Does the country issue its own currency? Is it fiscally responsible? What is this? I don't know if you can answer this question, but like, what is the state of the current government of Suriname?
So I actually worked. I when I was developing the capital market, developing the national stock exchange of the country, I reached out to the central bank governor and told him he was an ex Goldman Sachs banker, so he had experience with capital markets. So I laid out the plan. I said, Bitcoin, this is decentralized money on the internet. Like this is going to be our future money. This is going to be the layer of money on top of the internet. And everybody will be transacting on it, because if you look at the centralization that's going to happen with BRICS, and just you know the battle against the US dollar, and we're very dependent on the dollar or on the euro. So we're very dependent on other economies, other countries, for our own economy. And started working very closely with him. And then I saw basically the insides of the bank as well, and the problems that the bank had or has. So they issue their own currency, SRD. It's the third currency that we've had in our 50-year existence. So they've already scrapped zeros. They've already changed the currency, and basically, they're kind of like a wallet for the government, because they don't really function as a central bank should. They don't have, like for example, a liquid FX market. It's also an Excel sheet, and how do you say this? Failing. It's like a system where the banks kind of say what they want to pay for, and then it gets noted in an Excel sheet. It's completely ludicrous, but basically that's how our FX market is currently
Can,
functioning.
can I frame it this way? It sounds like a very similar story. The central bank of Suriname is essentially holding the population hostage, and essentially, like that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm seeing. And of course, Bitcoin is the solution to this. You are running for office. I'm starting to put the pieces together. If you get elected, and first of all, what office are you running for?
I'm running for president.
You're running for president. Oh my God, I love BJ Ditcher is the goat. Okay, so you are running for president. Okay, so if you get elected president of Suriname, do you vow right now on Simply Bitcoin to make Bitcoin legal tender in Suriname and free the people of Suriname from the tyranny of central banking?
Well, I've already vowed that, but basically, as a maxi, that is my own dream. But I actually vowed to take it a step further and work toward making it the unit of account, so that people actually live on Bitcoin and earn their salaries in Bitcoin, and that is the unit of account to what they earn. Our population is small enough, our economy is small enough. It is actually implementable here, especially with the natural resources that we have. We don't have a developed capital market, so going back to the central bank, they don't do open market operations, or they started it, but they're doing short-term deposits now at a 49% interest rate for a short-term deposit compared to 89 what it was. So they have no idea what they're doing. They have no idea how capital markets function internally or on the back end. They have no idea how the structures work or how to restructure ours. So our economy is basically dependent on what a handful of people, and it's the most incapable people of the country, because usually people don't want to go into politics. I'm with our party, we're actually dragging people into politics, or not even dragging, people are volunteering that have never had anything to do with politics. I myself would have never gone into politics, to be honest. Like, I hate government. I've grown up in a country where you kind of hate government, and just globally, you always know that government is always corrupt, no matter where you go in the world. It's always corrupt, and that's why why we fell in love with Bitcoin in the first place, right? It's, as you started out, it's separation of money and state. So you need to rethink the whole model. Like, how is this country going to function, or how is our economy going to function when you just eradicate? When we finally end the Fed, like, that is the dream, right? When okay, when the community finally ends the Fed, or it finally happens, or the dollar becomes irrelevant compared to the market cap of Bitcoin. What is that world going to look like? And I think we can be a breeding ground for what that world, what that system actually looks like and how it functions, because we already have a non-functioning central bank. We already have an economy that is not, it's our economy is very much based off of the like the royalties we earn off of natural resources, where we don't produce enough. 68,000 people, 10% of our population works for government. Half of our working population works for government. And that's basically just to get votes. It's not because we need that many people in government. So a lot of the problems that we face here with corruption, that I have faced throughout my life. Like, my father was murdered here because of corruption at the largest bank in Surinam. The Suriname bank. The CEO and COO were both convicted for illegally wiring funds from our accounts, and my father was murdered like shortly after, the day after the article came out. And that lawsuit is, like, the civil lawsuit is still ongoing. It actually went to court last month, and they put a new judge on the case to to decide a verdict that has no knowledge of the case whatsoever. So now we're going to the highest court of justice in the country, and I'm talking, something that happened in 2001. It's over 20 years ago, and our family still has not gotten justice. And my dad went to the central bank. He went to the bank. He went to the authorities. He went to our current president, who was at the time the minister of justice in the country, to also tell him, like, hey, funds are being illegally transferred from our bank accounts. These and these and these and these laws are what the laws are that are being broken. There's suspicion of money laundering, and he was murdered for it when he went to the authorities. When he blew the whistle, and it cost, just in proven transfers from our accounts, at $16.4 million. So it's my entire life. It's everybody's life here. Everybody here is tired. My entire generation is tired. Everybody under 40 is tired. Older people are tired of just systemic corruption for 50 years. So it's like the perfect place to create that new system that Satoshi enabled with Bitcoin, right? It's going to be really hard in the US. Like, even if you end the Fed, it's so systemic in the capital markets, in banking, in the way that politics is run. The population is so big. It's 375 million people. And Jesus Christ, Trump just created some DeFi fucking lending, some DeFi um, lending platform. So you can already see the way where that's heading, right? It's just the same thing, the same system, that same broken system. So I think we can actually here create a blueprint for integrity, create a blueprint for transparency. Like everybody that's joining the party needs to go through like a transparency, due diligence, everything with with the notary, and make everything that they own just public, so that you can see what we actually have, and if we've ever been in any trials or legal issues or complexities. And we only pick people that don't have a track record of corruption. Like, so every other political party, they already have a track record of corruption, and so do their leaders. So in that regard, we're also completely different, but the way we approach it is also completely different. We focus on projects and doing, instead of just giving people bags of food and making them dependent. That is what the other political parties do. We really focus on just change and bringing change here. But I don't want to go on a monologue. So, and
No,
sorry
no,
for
no. It's great, and don't apologize whatsoever. You feel very passionate about this, and I'm sorry to hear about your father. But obviously, the way that I'm seeing it from my perspective is, I think things happen for a reason, and I think that you have been uniquely positioned based on your life experiences to effectuate change in your country. And I think that you're seeing Bitcoin as a tool to do this with. And what you're talking about corruption, and this is something that is rampant in Latin America. Like, this isn't just a situation that you see in Suriname. This happened in Venezuela. In every single country, it's a rampant problem. And I would even say that it's very rampant in the United States as well. But I think that the reason that they're able to get away with it is because they're the world's reserve currency. And unlike every other country, they can print unlimited amounts of money, but because every central bank around the world is holding dollars, they kind of, can export that. Like, they can kind of get away with it, so to speak. But there are still consequences to that. And I think, specifically with Suriname, what's really interesting when you were talking about all this, it's a very small population. 50 years of dealing with BS. It kind of reminds me of El Salvador. Nayib Bukele's party is called Nuevas Ideas, which translates to new ideas. I think people were sick and tired of the whole, the traditional political parties. It seems like to me, just based on what you're telling me, Maya, it's a very similar situation. I think people are sick and tired. They want a solution. They see the corruption happening in 4K right in front of them. And Bitcoin is that tool. And I love the way that Nayib Bukele approached this, where he made the country's reserves public. And what I love about that is you can't really skim some off the top, if you know what I mean, if it's on an open ledger and everyone is seeing that the balance is increasing by 1 Bitcoin. And what happens if all of a sudden there's 10 Bitcoins missing? Someone's going to be like, okay, someone must have taken some, right? So yeah, I think the transparency, I think the fact that you can't create it for free, I think it adds a level. Essentially becomes a forcing function in a way where you now have a society whose base layer is built on uncorruptible money. And I think a lot of the world's problems stem from the fact that a lot of the countries all around the world, including Suriname, the base layer of society is based on it's corrupted, right? And it allows this capital misallocation, this theft. But I'm so happy that you're in this position, and you felt like you have the ability and you have the drive to really put yourself on the line, because now you're talking to me about safe, things that have happened to your family. Like, I'm sure that you feel this too. Like, this is something bigger than yourself. Like, you're putting yourself out in the like you're putting yourself in the field of fire, because you want to effectuate change for your country. And now my question to you is, how have people received it? Like, in the US, for example, it's a two-party system. It's incredibly difficult to run as a third party. It's basically impossible. Shout out to RFK for doing as much as he could. Eventually, he's like, you know what? I'm just going to get behind Trump. But it's
Yeah.
essentially, you either run as a Republican, you either run as a Democrat. I'm not really familiar with the political situation in Suriname. Could you explain that to everyone? Like, what's it like? Do you have a possibility of winning? Is this an uphill battle?
So it's a multi-party system. So you have a coalition and an opposition, and depending on how many seats you earn, that determines whether whether you end up in coalition or in the oppositional seats. And you need a 26 seat majority to have an influence on or select a president, for example. So there are two large parties, or the two largest parties are the National Democratic Party and the FIAP, which is our current government. Then you also have a little bit smaller, ABOP, which is our current vice president, who's on the Interpol list, by the way. So I'll be running up against him as well. But basically, every party has equal odds towards the elections. So it depends on how many votes you get, how many votes your party gets, determines how many seats you get. And one seat is about around 5,000 votes right now. And they just changed our constitution and then our voting laws to make it fairer. So now we have one man, one vote. So parties would in the past, they would manipulate, they would go to like remote villages, or they would go to a remote district where you only have 1,300 people living or 3,000 people living, and then they would get like 3 or 4 seats from that district just by convincing that small amount of people. Now it's one man, one vote. So, and the majority of the people live in the city. So that gives us equal odds. Also, a lot of the voters are young, and we have a lot of like first time voters as well. So about 40% of voters, and we've calculated it gives us about 22 seats, just targeting that younger generation. And that generation is, they do want change. And these older political parties, if you look at the NDP, for example, they had our former dictator, the president, who's also I'm not sure if he's on the Interpol list, but he has definitely been convicted of drug trafficking in the Netherlands, and is wanted, same as our current vice president. So you have systemic corrupt people in their leadership, and people that have already had convictions, or people that have already been in government and have been shown to be systemically corrupt, like very very corrupt. So people don't haven't had an actual alternative in to vote, because it's always been these two large parties, and people like myself and others that have joined, they would never go into politics. But everybody feels like, especially in the last 4 years, our country has gone, like the economy has gone to shit, healthcare has gone to shit, education is everything is moving backwards. 3 infants just died because there's a lack of staff and lack of material at our main hospital. The cardio department just had to close. So if you have a kid, the NICU is closed. If you have a heart problem, you need to go to another hospital, or you need to fly somewhere else. So the problems have gotten so bad that even hospital staff started protesting, in the past week. So, and that's the first time that has ever happened, because hospital staff usually don't protest, because they're so, they're core to the healthcare system. So they have just started protesting. Everybody's tired, and they need an alternative, but they don't have a good alternative. And it all boils down to what me and my team, because it's a team effort, it's multi-party. If one of the it's and Bitcoin as legal tender, and the issuances of shares and all of that, that's in our party manifesto. So it's going to be implemented regardless. But we operate as a team, and our goal is to develop this country and to save this country from, after these elections, we're going to turn into Venezuela, because we're getting oil royalties to the tune of 2.8 billion from our first well. starting in 2028. So whatever government comes to power now, they'll have the opportunity to also pawn that off, just like the other royalties and what they've already done with it. And this country will, the situation will get even worse. So we have to win in these elections just to prevent these corrupt people from
When
siphoning and stealing
what
everything.
absolutely. And when is the election? And my second question is, and we've seen this in Venezuela, right? I don't know how much I could talk about this on YouTube, but let's just say that the previous elections in Venezuela, a lot of people had questions about them. How
Mhm.
is the election system in Suriname? Is it something that people feel like they can depend on? And when is the election itself?
Yeah, so it's not as so you don't have the situation that you have in Venezuela here, which is we're very fortunate that we haven't had those kind of issues. They do allow foreign officials to come and check the elections and check the way that elections are progressing and be a part of the counting and the ballot system. And we've actually during the last elections had civilians go out and guard ballots because they were afraid that the NDP, the National Democratic Party, they were afraid that they were going to go there and burn them. So you had civilians like surrounding ballots just to make sure that nobody could access them.
Is that the
And
party currently in power?
no, former government.
Former government. What so and then is does it work like a parliamentary system where essentially like you become prime minister if you're if you're able to get a government majority? Is it similar to that, or is it more like the US system?
No, basically, it's a parliamentary system where if you have the
Okay.
majority of seats, basically you have the most leverage to determine who becomes the presidential candidate. And even within our team, if one of us performs better than I do, then that is the better candidate, right? That's the person that is better suited for the role. So it really depends on how we like I'm not gonna I like this is not my life's passion to become the country's president. I want to implement change. I want to make sure that change happens. And as long as we as a party, and our name is 597, is the country code. So as long as we as a team win enough seats, the person that is right for the job will have that driver's seat and will make this change happen regardless of whether I'm in that driver's seat or not. And the goal is actually, even if because I am the candidate within our party, but still, even if, like, for example, I do become president, um, which our odds are looking very good, um, my goal is to make myself irrelevant, right? Like Bill Gates said, not a fan of him currently, but he said that he would find a lazy person to do a hard job because they'd find an easy way to do it. Um, I think if you figure out how to make government more efficient, how to privatize industries and sectors and reduce government overreach into people's lives, give the free market an opportunity to actually be a free market and reign and create the foundation and the environment for people and the private sector to thrive, then I don't think that you need, a face to lead the country, to be honest. I maybe in relation to, foreign relations, other countries, but we're very isolated. Like, honestly, I don't know why our president travels as much as he does, because he's just like, he should have rather given that money to healthcare, to be honest. This country can be run a lot more efficiently.
And when is the election specifically?
May next year.
May next year. Okay. And how many you said your party specifically, if you focus on the youth vote, would be guaranteed 22 seats. How many seats in total?
51.
51. See, oh, so basically almost a majority. Would you need any type of coalition government, or could your party win it outright?
Well, if you win enough seats, then you just form a coalition government with your own party. You don't have to form a coalition with other parties. It's just your candidates, basically. in the coalition, and then the other parties would be in the opposition. And depending on, because it's at this point it's funding, right? It's funding, it's how we spend funding, and we want to be very transparent about how we spend funding as well. We have broad support here from the private sector, which is increasing as we, as we release more who our team members are, who is actually behind the party, who's actually running. And our manifesto, for example, like we've gotten buildings offered where we're going to have the party center, and like in the heart of the city, billboards, and that creates exposure. But every candidate is working on projects to fix issues in this country right now. So that is what we're focusing on, fixing problems in the country right now. So that's where our campaign funding goes toward solving actual problems for these people in their, in their community, in their area, or country, nationwide. And on average, some parties have raised, or like one party I think raised 300K. The two larger parties I've heard had around 2.5 million, $3 million. So that's about what you need in capital to, have a good shot at the elections. But we're being very smart about how we market our social media strategy, and basically just the strategy for how we show that we're different than the existing political parties and existing politicians. And I think that will make, especially the difference for the average voter that just is, they're either, like in the US, they vote against a party, not for a particular party always, right? It's usually you're voting against one. And here it's
How
always voting against the current government.
how long are the terms? So if you get a majority in parliament and you get nominated as prime minister or um, president, um, how long is the term?
5-year term.
5-year term. And then how do you ensure? So does this mean that you're going to be ending the local fiat currency? And my follow-up question to that is, from an infrastructure perspective, I think that uh, Bitcoin on chain is, in my opinion, the next 5-10 years is going to be like outside the ability for the average person around the world to be spending money on chain, specifically for smaller transactions. I'm very optimistic on Fedimint. I'm very optimistic on Lightning. But how do you plan to tackle that? Because that is a like, is the whole country going to be running on wallet of Satoshi? Um, how do you plan to tackle that? Of course, Nayib Bukele had his approach with Chivo. I remember when I went to El Salvador, I took it upon myself to essentially ask the population, like, are you using Bitcoin? And the vast majority of people, and I'm pretty confident it's probably the same case, just because I know how popular the dollar is in Venezuela, for example. The vast majority of people were just like, give me a dollar, give me dollars. And the official hotels and like the big chains, they all accepted Bitcoin, and you could play with Lightning, and it was phenomenal. But the everyday person, which I spent a lot of time just conversing with, they were just like, yeah, this Bitcoin thing is cool, but like, pay me in dollars, right? I'm assuming Suriname is dollarized.
No, so we have our
And
economy, but a lot of people do transact and save in the dollar. Yes.
and so it's I think that, like, it's just like, okay, you make Bitcoin legal tender, but does that mean you're getting rid of the local fiat currency? There's an educational component, there's an infrastructure component to it. I'm sure that, like, the Bitcoin community would just jump in there and try to, help this and tackle this issue. But what's your plan there, specifically for like lower payments? I get it, like if it's in your savings and you have Bitcoin in cold storage, write down the words and this and that. But for
Yeah.
everyday payments, like, what would you do? Because it still needs to be built out.
Yeah, so I think in terms of scalability, and if you're talking about smaller transactions, Lightning has been improving, I think, rapidly over the last year. I'm a big fan of OBs too, and the protocol. So it's and there, you have things that are still a bit early, but also interesting, like eCash mints, cashew, s- things that are being built on top of Noster, incorporating both liquid, both Lightning. You have Taproot assets that just came out after their major legal battle about the name. Um, so I see those as opportunities to make it cheaper for people to transact, but we could also have, for example, in an interim or a transition to full living on sats, or a combination of people being able to live on sats and having a Fedi mint or a eCash mint. And um, I feel like we shouldn't impose like a specific wallet on the population, like Chivo, or like what Bukele did in El Salvador. I feel like people should be free to choose. So I still think that I think freedom should be more important than Bitcoin adoption, because one is always supporting the other. So whether you educate them on self custody and they decide to self custody, or you have Blink, Wallet of Satoshi, Aqua, or whatever wallet that people can use here, they will adopt what they think is best for their situation, right? Um, and I mean, we can work on easier solutions. We can work on, for example, giving Blink more. Like I asked them for NFC. I asked them to integrate SRD into the wallet. Several things that made it easier for us to do grassroots adoption here. So you kind of see what works and what doesn't work. But I think if you have a unique use case, because I do think that innovation happens in environments where you have unique use cases where these things are actually needed. If you look at Machankura, if you look at M-Pesa in Africa and how that's scaled, I think use cases build products. So if you have a country where fiat rails are a nightmare, where you don't have any payment rails internationally, like websites don't have online payments currently, it's everything is still hard to do. You create solutions for that, right? And if you have leadership that doesn't want a commercial solution, like for example a Chivo, but wants something that actually works for their population and it makes it easier for them to transact and increases their level of freedom, like for example empowering Noster, right? Because Noster adds an extra layer of decentralization on what is traditional internet. Like, what we know as Web 2, Noster enables us to build, like, yeah, Jack Dorsey named it Web 5, Web 10. I don't care at this point what you want to name it, but it's replacing old infrastructure. So the if we put the focus on building on free and open source protocols and building on an open standard and making it the people's choice, and making their freedom a priority, and not centralization, then I think that will in itself create an environment where startups pop up, or where innovation heads and is developed in a certain way that it actually enables these faster rails. And something that gets developed for here, or gets improved for here, might be beneficial to the rest of the world, right? Because it benefits the whole ecosystem. That's the beauty of open source development, especially in the Bitcoin community. It benefits everyone. So if we start building that new system and we build it collaboratively, we build, not like in El Salvador, where everything was kind of like centralized and still a small community, but you build it just with the entire community. We open it up and we say, hey, we need this and this and this and this, and these are the problems we need to tackle in healthcare. This is the problem we need to tackle in education. This is the problem we need to tackle in infrastructure. And we direct our sovereign wealth fund and our resources towards stimulating that and build the regulatory framework around it as well to protect people's freedoms, to protect to protect them from government overreach, but which has so systemically grown in other countries and other regions. I think that creates an environment that is unknown globally, and that can give us a competitive advantage, and hopefully a better competitive advantage than El Salvador. Not that it's a competition with Naive, but still.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that's kind of like it goes down to the theory from the sovereign individual, right? Where you have different jurisdictions competing for Bitcoiners and entrepreneurs to come to those jurisdictions, and it seems like if you were to get elected president, that's essentially the environment that you want to foster. Now, my question to you is like what I'm seeing, and you're taking a free market approach, which I love because I'm a free market maxi myself. What I'm seeing in most countries is, as a Bitcoiner, you'd be like, this massive Bitcoin adoption happening globally, which I think it is happening. But what I'm seeing specifically Venezuela, Argentina, countries in Africa, you're seeing really the adoption of alternative assets, but most specifically stable coins. So I'm seeing like massive adoption. Like people really love Tether. People really love the because it kind of gives them the illusion that they're holding something stable, but compared to their local currency, it's actually extremely stable. So I'm seeing like a lot of adoption in Tether, and those are free market forces that are doing that. It's not being pushed by a politician, or it isn't a certain agenda. It's just people seem to just want to hold dollar equivalents in the digital form. Um, and if you're advocating for making Bitcoin legal tender, like again, I think that there's such an educational thing that needs to happen as well. It's not as simple as just making it legal tender. And, I think over the years, maybe it starts to happen. I think there needs to be an educational component where people need to be taught the benefits of sound money, because I think you and I could both agree that the reason that a lot of these countries, a lot of these developing countries, specifically countries that we're from, I think that a lot of the reasons as to why they're in the situations that they're in today is because the younger generations weren't educated. They didn't feel like they had an opportunity. So they had to resort to crime. They had to resort to corruption. They have to resort to these things in order to feel like they can get ahead. It never really created an environment where you felt like, in the United States, it's not like this anymore, but you were sold this idea of if you work hard enough and you believe and you put your head down and you get to work, you can live the American dream. That's essentially what we've been sold, right? And, our country's like, it's not the case at all, right? So I think there's an educational component. I think the younger generations need to be brought up to speed on this. I think just by making Bitcoin legal tender, I think it's a great start, but I think that there's all these other things that need to happen at the same time.
I think unit of account is very important. Having your salary be in sats, and not a fiat value of sats, but basically based off of just this is what you earn in sats. This is your salary. It's in the contract, it's in sats. You get paid in sats every month. When you go grocery shopping to the store, the prices are in sats. Or when if we for example implement it as a pilot, because we're gonna have to I'm gonna I can't be a one person maxi army here saying like, okay, or like a dictator, okay, we're gonna just change everything to sats. We're gonna have to have advisors here that and people from the industry that can actually talk about this, and where we can test it in a safe environment and see how that functions. But I think that's where you create that opportunity. Like for example, we have rural villages here where they can't use SRD right now. Like if it costs them more to travel to the city to use the SRD than what they earn in like a month or three
Of
months,
course.
depending on who you are. So these environments are perfect for if you create or actually they already have solar grids. So if you, for example, increase the capacity of these solar grids, we have a couple of villages where they already want to implement this. You increase the capacity of the solar grids, add mining, a mining component to it that earns a basically an income, or like a little sovereign wealth fund, a little treasury for that village. Those villagers don't have a source of income right now, right? And everybody, for example, starts earning in such, you start creating opportunity, economic opportunity for them, sustainable economic opportunity. There are several really great projects happening on the ground. Not Bitcoin related, but just production. Based off of what they're naturally already producing, and they earn in sats. So now you have an actually like mini economy running on sats, and then scale it up countrywide. We're small enough, 600,000 people. We have enough natural resources. We can actually issue a bond to develop our, 900 megawatt. It was initially estimated at 450 to 650 megawatt. Now 900 something megawatt capacity. You develop that with a Bitcoin bond. You then use that energy to mine Bitcoin. You create an addition to the sovereign wealth fund that's not coming from oil royalties. It's coming from directly from energy, converting energy into Bitcoin. People's salaries can actually be denominated in Bitcoin. Then there's no relation to fiat anymore, right? Then they'll see their savings, their salaries, they'll see it increase or decrease based off of the comparing it to a fiat value. But when they go to the store, when they get their salary, one Bitcoin is one Bitcoin, one sat is one sat, right? So
Absolutely.
I think that's where that mind shift will happen, and I think that is necessary. And I think it's harder to implement in a country where you have, 6 million people, or where you have 375 million people, in comparison to a country where you have, 240,000 odd something people living in the city, and 600,000 people all throughout the country. So I think this can be like a little fire that lights up and then just infects the rest of the world.
That is, yeah, and it's makes me very, very optimistic and bullish about the future of Suriname, and very noble what you're doing, and I applaud you for that. And this is my intuition tells me that the best is yet to come as it relates to this, and I do wish you all the best in your election of May next year. And if people want to donate or support you or keep up with this election, where can they find you? Where can they find out more about the election? Where can they find out more about the campaign?
Yeah, so they can first and foremost find me on Noster, or find me on X, Maya Parbhoe 25. Um, we have a Suriname adoption campaign running on Geyser Fund, which is where how all of the grassroots projects are currently funded, aside from a grant that they recently got from Bitcoin Beach. But basically, that's where paying them salaries. They go out and do merchant onboarding every day. Today they had another 5 people, so it's beautiful to see that it's actually like increasing by 5, by 6, by sometimes 2, but it's increasing day by day. So you can find Suriname Bitcoin adoption on Geyser, and we'll be launching our campaign website over the next week, where you'll see the ability to donate in Bitcoin and Lightning. So that's going live in a week or two, and then you can also read the manifesto and see Bitcoin as legal tender and what we intend to do, aside from just making it legal tender in there as well.
Awesome. Well, I highly enjoyed this conversation, and I wish you all the best of luck. I think this is an incredibly important election for your country, and I'm going to be staying tuned and seeing what happens. And I'm so excited to see what I'm so excited to see the future of Suriname, especially if you get elected, and what the country, where the country is going to head on a Bitcoin standard, and it, things tend to prosper when they're on a Bitcoin standard. So I'm incredibly excited. Anyways, Maya, it's been an honor to have you on the show. Thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
All right, guys, that was our interview. If you guys enjoyed the show, you know what to do. Smash the like button. Consider subscribing if you feel like we provided you value. We'll see you tomorrow on the live show, 12:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Until then, love you all. See you guys later. Peace out.
It was brought to you by BitcoinWell.com, on a mission to enable independence.